The Monado, Sword of the Bionis, the original Xenoblade, quite possibly the most iconic piece of imagery for the entire franchise. Yeah, I think it's time we start talking about that. Hello everyone, I'm Luxon, and welcome back to Xenoblade stuff after a while of me not having time to do Xenoblade stuff that might go on another break because I might not be able to talk for a week. But, that aside, this is part one of a three-part series that goes through a bunch of stuff. It's starting out with just the Monado, but it's gonna get into some pretty far-reaching stuff by part 3, so this is gonna take some time. It's gonna be 3 videos, they're all gonna be as long as a normal video and take as much effort to make, so there's gonna be a poll with the eye thing in the corner, so basically vote on whether or not you want me to make all 3 videos consecutively, alternate between one of these, one of some random other thing, Xenoblade related, or just third option, which is let me do what I want / comment what you want in the comments. That out of the way, this is a video that will spoil all of Xenoblade 1, but only Xenoblade 1. So while references to the Monado do appear in future games, I will be completely ignoring all of those for the purpose of explaining it in the context of the original one, so Lynn's hairpins are out. In addition, any possible new information about the origins of the Monado or that kind of thing that's revealed in other games in the series is not going to be accounted for. This is strictly a pre-X release analysis of the Monado. So, with that out of the way, and if you didn't want the spoilers you've probably got already, if you're still here, you probably know that when I say the Monado explained, I really mean the Monados explained. That's right, there is more than one Monado in the world, and while I will be talking about every single one that appears in the game, I'm not going to go in chronological order because before we talk about the big ones, I want to get all of the replica Monados out of the way first. It's kind of interesting, and some people might not be sure how they could even exist, but keep in mind that they're Machina technology. And what else is Machina technology? The Apocrypha generator. If Egil, who used to be like closer to his people than he is at the present moment in time, was able to create a machine that could shut down the power of a Monado, I don't doubt that the same technology could be used to basically reverse engineer and create a weaker version of one. While yes, in terms of numbers, the replica Monados are better than the Monado 2, albeit not as good as the 3 of course, in universe I'm pretty sure that none of the replicas can hold a candle to the 2, and possibly not even the 1. I'm pretty sure the only reason they exist in the first place is so Shulk can still use Monado arts in the time after he gets the Monado 2 taken away, and when he gets the 3 in the final battle. I have no source on that, that's just my gut feeling. But, yeah, all they are replicas, and there's not really much to explain other than they are cheap imitations of the real deal, which I think we should start talking about. When referring to all the different god Monados, people usually tend to split them up based on their owner, there being Zanza's Monado, which is the Monado 1 and 2 in different forms, Meyneth's Monado, which Fiora uses, and then Shulk's Monado, or the true Monado, which only shows up at the end of the game and in New Game Plus. But in reality, none of these swords actually belong to those characters. They are all generated by, and ultimately are under the dominion of, Alvis, the AI who created the world. Let's just put a pin in the whole Alvis thing for a little bit, and we're going to loop back around to that later. But first, I think it's important to talk about what a Monado can do and who is capable of wielding one. Simply put, Monados are capable of manipulating ether at a higher degree than anything else in the universe, which gives them, basically, power that is orders of magnitude above anything else that exists. Now, we don't have ether in our own universe, but it could be considered similar to any of the different types of particles or fields that permeate every square inch of space, and are just an intrinsic part of being. Ether is a bit closer to an actual physical substance than that, but it can be considered the same type of thing in terms of how important it is to the world and how it functions. The sun and moon, the stars, are literally just giant balls of ether. Ether is baked into every living being, and certain living beings actually have the power to manipulate it. Many monsters are able to control it in some limited degree to do different kinds of attacks. The Nebula class enemies literally are sentient balls of ether, living balls of ether, not necessarily sentient. and a lot of the sentient races are capable of controlling it. It's explicitly mentioned that High Entia are the best at it, hence why Melia has so much more versatility than anyone else and is able to shape the ether around her into many different types of elements and do a bunch of stuff. In fact, her art seal, she's the only one who could do that besides Shulk using the Monado to also manipulate ether, so that kind of makes sense. Melia basically has a couple of her own Monado arts, which goes along with the way where she can manipulate ether to a higher degree than anyone else, but still falls short when compared to Monado's. Shulk is explicitly capable of calling on a small amount of ether in the air to heal people to a light degree. Ricky gets some of his ether arts just intrinsically as being a Nopon, but also has the ability to use leaves or things from Machna in order to generate ether-based attacks. And Charla uses her rifle shells as catalysts in order to somehow change up the ether she fires from her rifle. What a Monado can do is all of that and more on like 7 or 8 different levels of steroids at the same time. Not only can it take ether that's present in the environment and use it to fuel its attacks, like say, using it to gather around other people's weapons to make them more powerful and capable of piercing Mechon armor, or forming the blade into a more gigantic version of itself in order to hit something really, really hard, or to form a protective shield around someone, or to somehow boost someone's reflexes and abilities to speed them up, or to somehow mess with a creature's brain and preventing it from using its abilities. Basically, Monado arts can be described as the Monado uses ether to do something very, very specific that happens to be very helpful to the person using it. In addition to that, it is so good at manipulating ether, and because of its connection to Alvis, who is capable of changing anything in the universe at whim, just chooses not to, but because he's also a super powerful computer who is pretty much running the universe on his own, the wielder of a Monado is also capable of detecting all the subtle movements of all the ether in the area, and then using that to basically extrapolate forwards in time, try to figure out where all that ether will go, and as such, being able to predict the future. All the visions they get, and really we only see Shulk and Zenza once, so we're not 100% sure on that, but all of the visions that we see are things that can only be changed by the wielder of the Monado. It's kind of that whole weird free will argument where if our brains are just chemicals, it's theoretically possible to predict everything someone will ever do. It's that kind of thing, but with ether. If you can predict what ether is going to do, you can predict what everyone else around you who doesn't have a Monado is able to do. Hence why, well, Shulk can see a bunch of different stuff, and it's mostly because of his own failures or shortcomings that a bad vision comes to pass. And Zenza can see everything up until he starts fighting Shulk at the end, and when Shulk gets the third Monado, which, now that Shulk can do the same thing, he has no way of predicting that. So, you're interested in the phenomenal cosmic power that comes with being a Monado wielder. What do you gotta do to become one? Well, other than somehow getting your hands on the most stupidly rare sword in the universe, you also have to either be a god who was literally given your own Monado at birth, have a god who's okay with you using their sword for the time being, or have a god inside you, otherwise you're literally just going to die. There are very few characters throughout the entire game who actually use a Monado, and they all fall into one of those categories. Shulk is obviously the most important one, and he's the only one who's actually two of them at different points in the story. First off, he has Zenza inside him from the beginning of the game to Mechonis Core, and the only Monado he touches at that point in time is Zenza's Monado. Basically, he's doing what Zenza wants him to do the entire time, and he also is Zenza, so he has zero problems whatsoever using it to its full potential, at least as far as he knows. Zenza's not giving him help and unlocking abilities for him, he is just naturally coming into his own besides that one time when Alvis had to teach him something. At the end of the game, of course, he gets the Monado 3, which is his own Monado, which was directly given to him by Alvis when he was told he became a god. So, you know, that's the god thing. On the Fiora side of things, she's kind of Fiora slash Maineth, but the Maineth Monado is basically just being used as a battery and also a way to house Maineth's soul, which is a thing Zenza has also done with his own sword at one point. Beyond that, yeah, when Mayneth fights Zanza in Mechanis Core, she takes it out and actually uses it as a weapon, and some residual energy is what's powering Fiora's body and letting her use Final Cross, but besides that, Fiora herself never actually uses Mayneth's Monado. Every time she does, besides the residual power, it is when Mayneth takes over and controls her body, so that counts more as God themselves than person with God in them. Dunban and Rein also touch the Monado 1 at different points in time, Dunban for much longer and Rein for only one scene. Dunban being able to use it makes sense because, well, if anyone is going to be able to fight the harmful physical effects, it's going to be Dunban because, you know, he is Dunban after all. And beyond that, he's using the Monado to destroy Mechon, which is what Zanza wants, because Zanza wants to get rid of that whole Mechanis thing, and killing a bunch of Mechon is probably going to help with that. Also, he's working alongside Dixon when this is happening. Dixon is an agent of Zanza, so he's clearly furthering Zanza's plans here, so while yeah, just the power of holding the thing and using it to fight is gonna have a toll on him, and he's not gonna have the godness needed to unlock most of its power, he's at least capable of swinging it around and using it to kill stuff as a really big hitty stick. Ryan, on the other hand, lacks the experience, the conviction, and quite frankly, the mental acuity in order to successfully do any of that stuff, and also the only reason he touched it was because he was curious, so yeah, all he could really do was hang on for dear life while the little piece of Zanza that was still in the sword took control and chopped up a room a little bit until Shulk stopped him. Besides all of these, there are two named characters who wield Monados at different points in the story. Arglis, in the past, has also used the Monado too, but it's worth noting that he was never Arglis in control when that happened. The instant he touched that sword, he was possessed by Zanza's soul, which was resting in it either after the battle with Mechanis or after some other being tired of doing god stuff, so the entire time Arglis used the Monado to destroy Egil's people, it was Zanza doing that, and not Arglis, so that doesn't count as a different character using the Monado. Alvis also fights with it for a very short period of time when he's teaching Shulk how to use Purge, but Alvis was also the creator of the Monado, who also is the Monado because robots. So that's basically just, if you got two copies of an AI, one of which is in a robot body and one of which is in a gun, if the robot picks up the gun and shoots it, that doesn't count as someone using the gun, that's just someone picking up an aspect of their own body and using it, so that also doesn't really count. The one other weird thing about the Monados that isn't part of their ether abilities or their Alvis stuff is the different forms they take. Why do the swords keep transforming into different appearances all the time? Like, what's up with that? Well, it's basically one of these the power is the heart of its wielder type things, where basically, if you're the god in charge of a Monado, you can determine what form it takes, and while that won't change its powers, it will make it harder or easier for an individual to use it. You can see this based on the different forms Zanza's Monado specifically takes. Mayneth's was a bit of a different case because it only had weapon mode, which was the form it was kind of always in because she never used it inside the Mechanis. There was no Mechanis version of her Monado. And then Fiora Core Crystal-y thing mode, which was basically a battery and was probably also the form it was in when Mayneth was lying dormant, so like Vinaya found it in that state, and then it also was able to open up into the dual blades that Mayneth and coincidentally also Fiora were good at wielding. Zanza's Monado, on the other hand, has a bunch of different forms. First off, there's the really weird, over-designed sword with wings thing that he uses in his, I guess, angelic appearance is what you'd call it. It's the one where he looks like Klaus but with cooler clothes, basically. So there's that sword, which I'm gonna say is probably the default form of Zanza's Monado. There is, of course, also the gigantic blade of pure light that he uses when he's inhabiting the Bionis and controlling its body entirely, but I don't think that's the default state, because, yeah, while he was born as a god being able to control the Bionis and stuff, we also do get to see, in a late-game cutscene, when he gains control of the Bionis again and uses it to destroy Mechanis, that he's still holding the wing sword in his hand while the Bionis has the Blade of Light. So it's more likely that when Zanza chooses to control the Bionis, he's basically able to use the wing sword to project the giant beam of light into its hand. They're not necessarily two separate swords, or the same sword in two forms. This does contrast another scene that I'm about to start talking about, though, which is after the original battle between the two titans, when the gods decided to disinhabit them basically and go into rest, you do see the giant blade of light condensing down into a small form and flying up what looks to be Valak Mountain. Now, it's my opinion that Zanza, basically, when he went to sleep after that fight, turned the wing Monado or the giant light blade Monado. It could be that he started with the light blade, then a bunch of stuff happened. When he got the Monado 2 back from Shulk, he decided to turn it into the wing sword, and then realized you could use the wing sword to project the light blade, which I guess makes more sense in that context, where he can use the wing sword to defend from Shulk if he gets attacked, while also having the Bionis to have a weapon or something. Not really sure how that works, but after that fight with Mechonis, when the two titans lay dormant, Zanza condensed his Monado into the Monado 2, and presumably put his spirit into it while he rested. It was the Monado 2 that drew Arglis's allure. He was the one captivated by it. He picked it up, got possessed by Zanza. It's very likely that Zanza intentionally turned the Monado into one that worked well as a sword for a giant for that very reason. He wanted to get picked up by a giant, probably because they were the dominant race on Bionis at the time, and I guess he didn't want to get the Hyantia messed up because he needed them for all his Telethia stuff. After that happened, Zanza eventually was defeated, his body was imprisoned in Prison Island, and his spirit was imprisoned in his Monado, which was then put all the way in Valak Mountain. That makes sense, you want to keep the body and spirit apart so Zanza himself can't start wielding the Monado. Pretty good idea. At this point, I'm pretty sure Zanza chose to condense the Monado, one that a Hams, or Hyantia, someone of that body size, could wield. It's very likely that he realized Arglis is gone, the giants are dying out, they might even be destroyed because Arglis was the one who destroyed a bunch of stuff. So, dominant races are going to be the shorter guys, turns it into something one of them can wield, and then, so many centuries later, the Monado expedition happens, everyone dies except Shulk, who now gets Zanza's spirit in him. Shulk begins starting to use the Monado, all that cool stuff happens, gets to Prison Island, Zanza realizes the Monado 1 isn't gonna cut it in terms of fighting all these new Mechon, so he awakens it, turns it into the Monado 2, and then Zanza was like, yeah, I don't need this body anymore, I got Shulk doing everything I want. He let Arglis's body die, his spirit was already in Shulk, and then somehow he was able to rebirth himself into his god body, and then, well, the end of the game happened. When Zanza got control of Maineth's Monado after killing her, all he really did was combine the two swords into one bigger sword that was the same type of weapon as the wing sword. So, either if it's not your own Monado, you only have limited control over it, or as long as you're the one wielding a Monado, if you're a god, you could do whatever with it. And he just didn't want to change it that much, but either way, that's what he did. He then used the power of the two Monados combined to do a bunch of bad god stuff. Then, in the middle of the fight against him, Shulk got the Monado 3, which I'm guessing is just his idealized version of a Monado, since that's the way Alvis spawned it in his hand, but we'll never really be able to know for sure. And hey, guess what? We're back about Alvis! We can start talking about him, and basically how Zanza could die, even though he was using not only one instrument of Alvis's power, but two instruments of Alvis's power, and when Shulk was, well, only using one. It all comes down to the fact that, called as they are, the gods are not the utmost authority in this universe. Alvis is. He's the one who created the entire thing, and he's basically the one who has the utmost control over it, although he doesn't really choose to do much with that, instead giving his power to others in order to do things, see what they do. He's kind of a very neutral machine, and it was basically his interest in Shulk that led to any of the stuff really happening in the first place. It seems like he actually gave Zanza and Maineth not only the power, since they were the only two living beings in the universe at the beginning, but he also gave them somewhat different powers. Not necessarily the fact that Bionis and Mechonis are different, that could just be a reflection of the gods' personalities, but the fact that Zanza and some of the Zanza Guardians that he summons in the final fight use Monado arts that Shulk does not have access to. So it seems like some of these are Monado arts that come from Maineth's Monado that Zanza is able to use now that he has it, and also he creates Guardians which have facsimiles of Monados that they can use in order to sort of use Monado arts. That seems like a thing you could do if you're at the height of your god powers. It's basically a cheat sheet making a replica Monado, and since you're the one creating the Guardians, you could just kind of upload whatever Monado arts you want them to know that you have access to into their brains, so that does make a lot of sense to me. And, even more importantly, it seems like the two Monado Zanza and Maineth have do actually have a few things in common, because in the final fights, Zanza has Bionis Buster and Mechanis Buster. These are two different arts that have two different effects, but it seems like, although the two Monados may not have some arts in common, and function a bit differently, they do both still have access to the Monado Buster technique, which, let's be real, it's kind of the simplest one of the Monado arts in general, so if they're gonna have one in common, it makes sense to be that one. So, Zanza's Monado and Maineth's Monado are in complete control over the universe, and even combined, they still have to defer to Alvis. Well, Alvis decided that Shulk was going to be the new god, the one to decide how things would go on in the future. So, what did he do? Well, instead of giving him the same type of Monado he gave Zanza or gave Maineth, he just gave him the true Monado. Just, that's all there is to it. Shulk's Monado is basically the true idealized version of one. It is a sword encompassing all of Alvis's power, not just some of it like Zanza or Maineth could use. It's also why Zanza is weaker in the final phase of the final boss fight. It's not just, oh, you get a better weapon so you can actually beat him this time, it's that he is actually significantly weaker. Probably because Shulk is drawing so much of Alvis's power in order to use the true Monado that Zanza can't even access as much on his own. Seems about accurate to me, makes sense to me, I don't know. Basically, Alvis is a computer, and the three gods are three users of it. Zanza and Maineth, they could do a lot of things. They can change a lot of stuff about the universe and access a lot of different aspects of Alvis's computerness, I guess. This is a bit of a stretched metaphor. Shulk, on the other hand, is an administrator. He gets the keys to the kingdom, except the kingdom is the entire universe. He could do anything. He's just not really aware of that fact until Alvis tells him. Once the immediate time he gets the Monado 3, he's like, yeah, I gotta kill Zanza. This is a strong sword, I'm gonna use it to kill Zanza. And it's only until later on, when Alvis shows him how the universe came into being, when Shulk actually realizes just how much he can do, then of course, he recreates the universe and gives up that power in order to just kind of be a normal dude, because he doesn't want to do any of that god stuff. So, yeah, that's about it. That's really all I can say about Monados in Xenoblade Chronicles 1, so tune in next time for either the next video in this little cycle, or something completely different depending on what you guys vote in that poll. So, until next time, this is Luxon, signing off.